Okay. What can you say about these?
Well, in terms of our lesson plan, to be perfectly honest and blunt, I don't think we had any of them in mind when planning it. I mean, perhaps we thought we did, but if you look at it and if you read it, it doesn't look like we had them in mind.
Okay, right. What do you think teaching learners how to learn is? I mean, that's not for you, Clara, for everyone.
Maybe it could be providing your students with tools that may help them learn easy.
That's it. They say it's not that you have to tell them, well, a ver, para hacer esta actividad ustedes tienen primero que buscar la información, después seleccionar de la información que han señalado, tienen que seleccionar algunas palabras, las que ustedes más crean importantes. Y de ahí tienen que pensar en cómo esas palabras, a ver, that is not teaching learners how to learn, that is telling them how to learn. How is teaching them how to learn?
Perhaps, as Flor said, showing them strategies or showing them tools they can use to learn.
First, you have to sort of ensure that your lesson plans will contain a variety of activities. That is to say, the students cannot use the same scheme to solve the tasks that you prepare for them. That is one thing. So it means that they will be challenged, right, to do different things and try out new ones, right, in order to, let's say, solve tasks and achieve goals. Okay, that is one thing. That is from the start, right? And then another way of doing this is to, once they have solved, let's say, an activity, ask them how they have done it. Okay, reflect on what they did. There is another step you can take, right? But you asking them what they have to do, not you telling them what they need to do or what you want them to do. That is changing the roles, swapping. Okay? One thing is, acá tienen que hacer esto, 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 esto. And another thing is to say, ¿qué hay que hacer acá? They are two different things. And they are two different ways of coping or tackling the same, let's say, problem, that the students may be confused at something that they have to do in the during the lesson. Okay, of course, I mean, you may say, but how are we going to do that in English? Well, you have to try, and if that is not possible, you may switch to Spanish. But what is expecting students' answers in Spanish when you are eliciting? It means that your elicitation has not been carefully planned. If the students, what the students can, let's say, contribute with will be in Spanish, it means that you have to readjust the elicitation. That is to say, your questions have to be reformulated because they are not clear enough for the students to find, let's say, the words to say it to you. See what I mean?
Yes.
Okay, so perhaps you have thought of asking the students the questions, right? But they are too difficult, or the students are not yet ready to answer them. Okay? What about, well, somebody who wants to share their outlooks on this?
We think that in our lesson plan, what we had in mind was motivating students. Like
And what
only.
did you do in order to attain that, Camila?
For the warm-up, we ask questions. What did you do yesterday? Did you do your homework? And questions like that. And we wanted to motivate them. We didn't think about boosting their confidence or displaying personal interest. Like that was not in our minds.
Okay, right. Well, my advice would be, Camila, whenever you want to refer or to connect, why not, what you intend to teach with the students, let's say, lives, try to do it not just using the bridge of school and schoolwork. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
What did you do yesterday? Did you do the homework?
Yes.
Well, for the studious one and responsible ones, that will be a question that is motivating, right? That you are really interested in how, I mean, when they did the homework and all that. But most of teenagers are a bit lazy, right? And they are not, let's say, happy when they have homework. So I'm not saying that you are not going to ask that question. Of course you do, but include other questions too.
Yes, yes.
That have to do with entertainment, entertainment, hobbies, let's say sports, why not? Thinking about the fields of interest of adolescents.
Yes, okay.
Right? Okay? And that has to do with motivating, engaging them. Good.
And sorry, a question. And how can we boost their confidence?
For example, by making a careful choice of the language you use.
Language. Okay.
That is to say, when you speak to them, when you write instructions, I mean, make them feel they are safe in your classroom.
Yes.
And that is to say, sometimes it happens that the students feel, let's say, that they are imposters in your classroom. That is to say, I am here, but I'm not supposed to be here because I really don't know what the teacher is, let's say, talking about. So there, right, in a way, is in detriment of the student's confidence. Have you ever had that feeling?
Yes.
I used to have that feeling in my translation course. I really felt that I was not, let's say, coping with the expectations of my teachers. I really had that feeling, right? But it had to do with something that was going on with me. And I guess that in the long term, I realized that it had to do with the fact that I was not pretty satisfied with the choice of career I had made. That's why I felt I was not in safe ground. But it was not because of my teachers specifically, right? Okay, but well, the best thing to do is to try to guarantee this well-being as far as possible in the classroom.
Okay, great.
All right. Okay. Do you want to ask or to share somebody else?
A way of boosting their confidence might be, for example, make them read or challenge them to sustain a conversation with the classmates, so that they, in a way, improve their language and feel more confident.
Perhaps, right? Or
that,
when they have to read aloud, maybe
is that a good way?
You can ask them at the beginning. That much depends on each individual, right? But if you know that there is one student that is shy, right? Do not make him or her read in a loud voice, but perhaps ask him when you are monitoring an activity to do that, or to read the instructions, or to read some sentences within, I mean, next to their desks, so that they are not exposed to the rest. For example, I can think of, as you mentioned, reading aloud. Because eventually the students, when they feel more confident, especially about reading in a loud voice, they put up their hands. Right?
Okay.
I'm just thinking about that specific, let's say, situation. There may be other things that we can do, right? There are a lot of things we can do. And sometimes we do things, let's say, unintentionally, and we do it, let's say, without bad intentions. That is to say, sometimes we say things that are not, let's say, going to help the students be confident. And for example, as Dalmiro mentioned, that he said this activity is a bit difficult. Well, that is not that you are fully aware and you want them to feel they can't. It's because sometimes we, lack experience, right? Or we have not been helped by peers or trainers, and we do it without being, let's say, without the intention of being, let's say, cruel or thoughtless, right? Okay. Let's see, everybody has prepared the lesson plan, so I guess there must be something you can say about this related to these ideas. Yes? No comments on this? What about organizing an appropriate learning environment? In fact, it's very difficult to think about them not as a whole, because if you organize an appropriate learning environment, you are likely to boost their confidence, to motivate, eventually to display a personal interest. Somebody is saying something on the chat. Fine, what you say, Emiliano. Yes, I did realize about, I did realize that. What's going on that nobody's speaking?
I have a question regarding the last point, organizing an appropriate learning environment. For example, when we taking or when we plan our lessons and we consider the difficulty of the activities and how we grade them in terms of from the easiest to the hardest, is that related to organizing an appropriate learning environment?
That's it.
Right.
It is, okay, right? Because, I mean, in order for learning to take place, you need an organization that goes from the seating arrangement to the blackboard display, right? And the activities you have planned. It covers all that. Even to the board display. And it has to do with this feeling of safety. That they really know they can count on you, and that the things that you prepare for the students have, let's say, a reasonable meaning to happen. So the teacher wants me to do this, but I'm sure that perhaps I don't think it is interesting, but I'm sure that if a teacher has decided that we'd better do this, it's because she has a reason. And that is called reciprocity. Okay, that is a concept that is really very important. What is reciprocity? That the students and the teacher see eye to eye? Is that? No. It is that the students trust your, let's say, pedagogic and didactic, let's say, proposal. So they do as you say, not because they are afraid of you or because they are afraid of questioning you. It's because they recognize you as an expert in the language and in teaching, and they, in a way, let you drive them towards, let's say, the path of learning. But that doesn't mean they are going to be subjects without an opinion or passive ones. No, it means that they trust. It is mutual trust. So when a student says, teacher, I'm sorry, I didn't do the homework, I had a problem at home or something like that, well, you may say, well, it's all right then. I mean, you can hand it in next class. I mean, if that is showing understanding, right? And that is trust. Now, if a student keeps on doing that, you have to find out why this is happening, or is it out of, let's say, lack of responsibility, or that the student is really cheating on you or lying to you, right? But we cannot, let's say, in a way, think that the students are potential liars, because we will never build any kind of, let's say, relationship if that is the way we regard them from the very start. Okay, for example, it has to do with appropriate learning environment. Okay, any other comments? Take a look. This is what who was the one that mentioned Vygotsky? I think it was Lionel. I think so.
No, it wasn't me. It was Dalmiro.
Dalmiro. Vygotsky describes mediation as a process where the teacher displays a set of tools that will help the learners to solve a problem or reach a goal. And here we have some of these concepts. Mediation, tools, solve a problem, reach a goal. Key concepts, key words, stepping stones. What were the tools in this potential lesson that you were going to give? What goals have you set? Were the students challenged to solve a task? Or was it merely transmission and substitution without much meaning? Okay, how, let's say, dominant was your figure in terms of the intervention in the different tasks? That has to do with mediation. Any questions about what mediation is? What tools are?
Yeah, can you clarify the tools aspect? I feel that perhaps that refers to the learning techniques, or is it the contextualization, or what's the other one? Scaffolding?
All of them are tools.
Ah.
I mean, it covers resources, strategies, and techniques. And perhaps if we think in Spanish, we can make a difference even between resources and materials, right? Resources, thinking about dispositivos, right? Because there isn't an exact translation into English. I mean, it seems that the general word would be resources. And in Spanish, we have dispositivos y materiales y recursos. Okay, in English, we have resources. What is, and as Almiro said, what may be contextualization? It is a tool. Now, what is it? Is it a strategy or a technique? Somebody's writing on the chat. Oh, wait, it disappeared. Let's see what they say.
I would say it's a technique. I would say a technique too.
A technique. How do you do it? Can you give me a sort of list of steps I can follow?
To contextualize?
Mm-hmm.
Steps, okay. Well,
I'm just asking you.
Well, you might start taking a look at the context. I mean, the place, the people, and then, well, you have to take into account the different factors, learners factors, right? And well, in from that point, you have to devise anything that might be engaging, motivating, and well, that is the objective, right?
Okay, well, we're going to discuss that, right? Because in fact, there is a difference between what a strategy is, that is a bit more complex, and a technique is more simple, right? It's something you can do it in a few steps or even in one step, right? And a strategy is more elaborated. I would say that contextualization is a strategy because it entails different steps, and there are many variables. That's why a technique seems to be more solid in terms that it can be applied in many different situations and it won't change. I would say that a strategy is a number of techniques put all together in a witty way. And perhaps that has to do with contextualization because you have mentioned some variables. You see what I mean? For example, think about this. Let's say asking yes/no questions is a technique. Elicitation is a strategy. because in elicitation, you're going to combine several things, not just using yes, no questions. All right. There somebody's writing. Well, but anyway, I mean, in fact, there are different points of view in terms of this, right? You have to get, let's say, you have to position yourself in, let's say, an approach towards this, right? What is a technique and what is a resource and what is a tool and all that, depending where you're standing, right? There is a lot of material written on this, right? And different authors have different positions. Well, set tasks that are at the level just beyond that at which the learners are currently capable of functioning, and teach principles that will enable them to make their step unassisted. Think about the texts that you chose, the language that you use in the input. In general, did you get any comments? Most of you included reading material. And I made some comments on that. That was one of the finely tuned and roughly tuned input. Were it meant to be roughly tuned or finely tuned?
I'll say roughly tuned.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Roughly tuned?
Roughly tuned, okay? So that means that in the text, students are supposed to understand what it is about. Much depends on the type of task you want to do, right? Now, it's not necessary to understand every single word. But there were, I mean, the biggest problem in most of the lesson plans that I found was one that had to do with the input. Perhaps not that it was not roughly, it was too complex rather than more than roughly tuned in a way. But there was another, let's say, common mistake. They were too long. Too long for the task. So it would take a long time for the students to read them. And it will make what? Eventually the students lose interest. Well, I mean, and their interest will fade away. So we have to bear in mind that the attention span is shorter and shorter every day, let's say. Right? I mean, these new generations have a very, very short attention span, right? It's that of a child, I would say, but not because of immaturity. It's because of the way they have been receiving stimuli all the time, right? So what do you, that's it. The idea is, please do not discard the texts that you have, let's say, invented, created, recreated, or adapted, right? The idea is that you make them effective and attractive at the same time. That is to say, do not make them so wordy that the students will imagine if they have to read 6 texts, right, to do one task. I mean, by the 3rd one, they will lose interest. So what can you do? Well, you have already produced some material. So try to see if you can, let's say, use 3 of the texts that you have prepared and save the others for a different task and find a way of, let's say, making a different task using or recycling what you have prepared. That is the idea. Not to discard things, but to make them better or to use them later on. Right? Then, the thing is that what do we mean by enable the students to make the step unassisted? That's to say, are we supposed to leave our own students to their own devices, all alone coping with? No, I mean, the idea is that the teacher will be there to help them if they need it, to guide them, to be a facilitator, but not to be a controller that is, let's say, in a way, getting to their desks to see if they are speaking English and if they are using it properly. It's not just that. I mean, the idea is, well, teacher, can you come? We don't know, o no sabemos bien acá, ¿qué tenemos que poner? And then you start guiding them, clarifying tasks and all that. Right? But let them, right, call you up, let them request help when it is needed, and trust that they can solve tasks on their own. Do not spoon feed them with solutions. Because, for example, the 80s generation, mine, is used to doing that. To spoon feeding their students and their children.
Sandra, I have a question about that. When you are delivering a lesson in which you are in a way fostering some autonomy, right, in students, do we have to include, for example, certain examples of the task? I mean, I don't know, sentence structures, question and answers in the Blackboard synopsis. I mean, they are doing an activity. Do we have to provide them with exam?
I understand. In fact, as you said, and most of you included in your lesson schemes, you wanted to, let's say, draw back onto what the students have been doing lately. That is to say, in a way, recapping on what they have done, right, before that lesson. So the idea is, if you really want to focus on, let's say, question forms, question and answering, right? Giving opinion, in this case was question and answering or telling stories or anecdotes. Well, in fact, there it is a good idea to sort of have a kind of Blackboard synopsis or a couple of, let's say, examples to refresh their memories on how to organize a question, right? For example, have an example of how to, let's say, indicate time reference. For example, having a few days ago, last week, that is to say, just that as a guide. That the students will not be, let's say, compelled to copy or whatsoever. It will be there just for the ones who need to look onto it so as to cope with the task you have given them. It's like a memory help that they will have. And you know what? In fact, I was in a way going to show you something, but I'm running out of time, about substitution tables, which have been, let's say, disregarded by many, let's say, theorists on, let's say, language learning. And sometimes we believe they are formulas, but sometimes a substitution table or a structure table may have different let's say, resources inside that has to do with visual stimuli, with icons, right? Different dimensions can happen in a structure table in a way, and it can be really meaningful. So I found a video about from a school that is called Bell Foundation, and they run different schools of language. I mean, English language as a foreign one in different important cities. And in fact, I found it very interesting because they, in a way, say that substitution tables can be meaningful and they can help you with this kind of Blackboard synopsis that I was referring to. So what I'm going to do is to, let's say, give you the link of that short presentation that doesn't take longer than 4 minutes, I think. And then I have extracted some examples, right, of structure tables. And I thought that they could help you out with the design of a Blackboard synopsis that is completely different from that of a Blackboard display or board display. What is the difference? The difference is that in the synopsis, you are going to include the examples, right, that in a way show or prove the sample of the language you are focusing on. And the Blackboard display is just the way the board looks after you have either let's say, appointed the students to do a task with instructions and some sentences you have copied, or the checking of an activity. That is the Blackboard display. It's just like a pic of what you wrote on the board, right? Whereas a synopsis is a summary of the language focus of the lesson. Do you see the difference between these two? And I think that you use them interchangeably, and they are not. They are two different things. Remember this common confusion between rubrics and instructions. The rubric is what? It's the sort of checklist and the criteria you follow in order to assess or give an appraisal on a performance. There could be something written, something oral. Right? That is a rubric. Instructions is where you write what the students are supposed to do. Fine? You have that in the Google Classroom. For example, when I design or assign some homework, I've got the rubric and it says rubric, and there I can write completion, organization, all right, and then I send comments on the different, let's say, items of the scale I devise. Well, we have less than a minute. The idea is that